Vladimir Nikolaevich, 55 years old, sat in his armchair, immersed in anxious thoughts. His living room, once filled with laughter and bustle, now seemed too spacious and silent. Every corner held echoes of a life gone by, especially memories of his late wife. 6 months ago, his familiar world collapsed. The construction company where Vladimir Nikolaevich had worked his entire adult life suddenly went bankrupt. Overnight, he found himself without a job, without the stability he was accustomed to, as if uprooted. The loss of his job hit him with unexpected force. He felt useless, empty, as though the main purpose of his life had vanished. The days dragged on endlessly, filled with heavy melancholy and a sense of hopelessness. Retirement was still far off, and despite all his efforts, new job opportunities did not materialize. To this new, oppressive unemployment was added an old but no less heavy burden: unpaid debts. Many years ago, at the peak of his ambitions, Vladimir Nikolaevich had taken a risky step and opened his own small construction firm. The attempt failed, leaving behind not only disappointment but also substantial loans. Over the years, he had paid off the debts bit by bit, scraping together every penny. Now, without a steady income, he felt the noose of these obligations tightening around his neck. He was a responsible man, but overly trusting, and that bitter experience taught him only one truth: the world of business is cruel and merciless to the naive. His children lived their own separate lives, as if on the other side of an invisible wall. His son, Oleg, 30 years old, was the complete opposite of his father. Ambitious, calculating, and a successful entrepreneur, he owned a thriving, albeit small, business. Oleg was married, and from the outside, his life seemed exemplary. However, there was always a sense of estrangement between him and his father. Remembering his father's financial failures, Oleg treated him with slight contempt, considering him old-fashioned and a failure. His calls were rare, and his visits were limited to formal exchanges. His daughter, Marina, 25, was a student living separately, immersed in her dreams of emigration and freedom. She preferred to stay away from any family problems, especially those involving money. Her calls were even less frequent than Oleg's, and her detachment felt like a thin but impenetrable barrier. Vladimir Nikolaevich felt he was losing connection with both his children, but didn't know how to rebuild those bridges. He bore this pain silently, accustomed to keeping all his troubles to himself. Their old house, where he had grown up, was more than just a structure of brick and wood to him. It was a symbol, his anchor in the stormy sea of life. It held not only furniture and belongings, but also priceless memories of a carefree childhood, strict but loving parents, and happy years spent with his wife. He would wander through the rooms for hours, touching the walls, or spend time in the small garden, tending to every bush and flower as if trying to find the roots that seemed to have been torn from his own life. Vladimir Nikolaevich's quiet, almost silent routine continued. He diligently browsed job listings and sent out resumes, but all his efforts were fruitless. The days were monotonous, blending into one another, devoid of vibrancy. His only solace was memories of the past, which wandered through his home like shadows, reminding him of times when his life was full of meaning and hope. He felt his familiar world slowly but surely crumbling to dust. The monotony of Vladimir Nikolaevich's days was deceptive. The calm, if it could be called that, hung by a thread. The shadows of his old financial problems began to thicken, taking on ominous shapes. First came letters from the bank, formal, curt, but increasingly threatening, filled with legal warnings and threats of lawsuits. Vladimir Nikolaevich's heart clenched with fear at the sight of each new envelope. His hands trembled. The debts, which once seemed heavy but manageable, now loomed over him like a sword of Damocles, ready to fall at any moment. Then came the phone calls, unknown numbers, hoarse, insistent voices, often hinting at threats. These were debt collectors, demanding immediate repayment, shouting, threatening serious consequences, and insulting him. Vladimir Nikolaevich tried not to succumb to panic, but each call made his breath catch, his palms sweat. He felt cornered like a hunted animal. His already fragile world, held together by a thread, was now on the verge of collapse. He knew this couldn't go on. He had to do something. But what? Ask friend for help? They were barely making ends meet themselves. Sell something valuable? Apart from the house. He had almost nothing left. In desperation, he decided his only option was to turn to his children. He first called Marina, his daughter, trying to explain the situation as calmly as possible, avoiding dramatics, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. "Dad, you know how it is," came Marina's attached, indifferent voice over the phone, as if she were talking about something trivial. "I'm just a student. I don't have any money myself. I barely have enough for school. And besides, these are your problems, Dad. You got yourself into this debt. It's not my responsibility." Her words, full of selfishness, cut Vladimir Nikolaevich deeply. He had expected such a reaction, but the pain was no less sharp. He understood. Marina had always been distant, consumed by her dreams of a carefree life abroad. She wasn't used to hardship and didn't know what real problems were. Her reaction, alas, was predictable. In her world, there was no room for his troubles. Turning to Oleg was far more difficult. Their relationship had always been strained, like a taut string ready to snap. Oleg openly showed his disdain for his father, especially for his past failed business, which he considered a family disgrace. But there was no other choice. Vladimir Nikolaevich knew that without his son's help, he couldn't face the looming catastrophe. With trembling hands, he dialed Oleg's number. The ringing seemed endless. His son didn't answer right away, as if reluctant. "Father!" Oleg's voice was low, cold, purely businesslike, without a trace of emotion. Vladimir Nikolaevich, struggling to keep the tremor from his voice, began explaining the situation. He spoke of losing his job, the mounting debts, the constant threats from collectors. He tried to sound calm, but his voice betrayed his inner tension and fear. Oleg remained silent, a long, agonizing pause. Vladimir Nikolaevich felt his last hopes slowly fading, like smoke. He imagined his son frowning, listening to his pitiful excuses. "Father!" Oleg finally spoke, his voice carrying not so much sympathy as a cold, ruthless analysis of the situation. "I warned you. I told you not to get into that business. You're to blame for your own problems." Once again, Vladimir Nikolaevich shrank. He had anticipated these words, foreseen them, but they still pierced his heart. It wasn't just a reproach. It was a confirmation of his own powerlessness. "I know, son," he whispered, barely audible. "I know. But I need help now. I can't handle this alone. They're threatening me, threatening the family." Oleg fell silent again. Vladimir Nikolaevich waited for his response, his decision. He understood that his fate and that of his home now depended entirely on his son. The encroaching darkness of debts and threats enveloped him from all sides, and only Oleg, it seemed, could dispel this gloom. But at what cost? The ghost of the past had caught up with him. Oleg's silence felt endless, oppressive. Vladimir Nikolaevich felt each second of this weight, draining his last reserves of strength. Finally, his son spoke, his voice still cold and calculated, laced with a harsh, unwavering resolve. It was an ultimatum. "All right, father," Oleg said, as if pronouncing a verdict. "I'll help you. I'll take on all your debts. But I have one condition." Vladimir Nikolaevich's heart sank in foreboding. He knew Oleg never did anything without benefit to himself. Any help from him always came at a price. "What?" he whispered faintly. "I'll take on all your financial obligations, all the loans." Oleg's voice was steady, devoid of emotion. "But in return, you sign over the house to me. Completely." Vladimir Nikolaevich froze, as if struck by lightning. The house, his old house, where he was born, where his childhood and youth unfolded, where his parents lived, where he spent the happiest years with his wife. The house that was his fortress, his refuge, the only thing tying him to the past and giving him a sense of stability in the present. "Oleg, how can you?" Vladimir Nikolaevich's voice trembled, breaking into a rasp. "This is my home. It's all I have left. My memories, my life." "Father, let's be realistic." Oleg's voice grew harsher, dismissing any sentimental notes. "This house is a burden. It's nothing but expenses. You're out of work. Who's going to maintain it? You don't need it in your old age. It's just losses. Think about the upkeep, the repairs, the taxes. It's a constant headache. Oleg began methodically, as if following a pre-prepared plan, outlining all the advantages of his proposal. He spoke of the house being old, needing major repairs that Vladimir Nikolaevich could never afford. He argued that maintaining such a large property was costly, with the money simply vanishing into thin air. He even suggested that his father would be better off living in a small, comfortable apartment, which Oleg, of course, could rent for him, or even in a modern retirement home where he'd be well cared for, free of worries. "You will be at peace, father," Oleg insisted, his voice tinged with arrogance. "No worries, no problems. And I'll turn this house into something decent. Maybe I'll sell it, maybe rent it out. Either way, it'll be profitable for everyone, and you'll get a peaceful old age." Vladimir Nikolaevich felt the ground slipping from under him. Giving up his house, the symbol of his life, his family, seemed like an unforgivable betrayal of himself, his ancestors' memory, his late wife. But he also clearly understood there was no other way out. The debts were suffocating him, the collectors relentless, their threats growing more real. He was desperate, cornered by circumstances and his own mistakes. He tried to find some compromise, to appeal to a sense of kinship. "Oleg, maybe there's another way? Maybe you could just lend me the money? I'll find a job. I'll pay you back, I swear." "No, father." Oleg cut him off, his voice resolute. "This is my condition. Either this way, or I don't help. And then you'll be left alone with your debts. And believe me, they won't go anywhere. They'll devour you. Decide." Vladimir Nikolaevich fell silent. In his son's eyes, he saw not only cold calculation, but utter ruthlessness. Oleg felt no sentimentality toward the house or its history. To him, it was merely an asset to be used profitably, a tool for gain. His son's ultimatum was cruel, but seemed the only chance to avoid complete ruin. With a heavy, aching heart, Vladimir Nikolaevich finally uttered the words that came with great difficulty, as if each one tore the fibers of his soul. "All right, Oleg, I agree." Those words marked the end of one era and the beginning of a new, uncharted one. His home, his fortress, no longer belonged to him. He felt a growing emptiness inside, a harbinger of deep, piercing loneliness. The process of transferring the house began immediately and took only a few days. Oleg acted swiftly, as if fearing his father might change his mind. Vladimir Nikolaevich felt crushed, broken, devoid of all will. He moved through a fog, mechanically following his son's instructions. Oleg was cold and businesslike. No unnecessary words, no signs of empathy. He simply followed his plan with precision and detachment, as if finalizing a routine transaction rather than taking the last thing his father had. Oleg's lawyer, a young and efficient man, quickly prepared all the necessary documents. The notary they visited was polite but completely detached, dryly reading the contract's clauses without delving into details, as if it were routine procedure. Vladimir Nikolaevich listened to the notary's words, which echoed in his head like the signing of a sentence. He wasn't just transferring walls and a roof to his son's ownership. He was giving away a part of his soul, his life, his history. Each clause of the contract took a piece of him. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen to sign. Oleg, standing nearby, watched with an unreadable expression. Vladimir Nikolaevich tried in vain to discern what his son felt, triumph, regret, or simply cold indifference to his father's fate. There wasn't a spark of warmth or hint of remorse in his eyes. When all formalities were complete and the final signature was placed, Oleg extended his hand to his father. "Thank you, father," he said, and for the first time in days, there was a trace of something resembling human emotion in his voice. "You won't regret this. I'll take care of you. Now you can be at peace." Vladimir Nikolaevich only nodded. He couldn't speak. A lump in his throat prevented him from uttering a word. He felt deeply betrayed, yet he understood that, under the pressure of circumstances, he had agreed to this. He was a victim not only of external forces, but of his own naivety, his inability to resist pressure. After the paperwork was finalized, Oleg, as promised, transferred the necessary funds to fully pay off his father's debts. The collector's threats finally ceased, the phone calls stopped, and this was the only positive outcome of this burdensome deal. Vladimir Nikolaevich gained a reprieve from constant fear. but the cost was exorbitant. Oleg also helped his father move his modest belongings to a small, tidy rented apartment, which he paid for initially. The apartment was clean but lifeless, devoid of any personality. There was no beloved garden, no old workshop, no corner holding his memories or the familiar, cozy scent of his home. He felt like a stranger in this new, sterile space, as if trapped. As he said goodbye, Oleg said, "Don't worry, Father. I'll visit you, and of course, I'll help you. You won't have any problems now." Vladimir Nikolaevich only nodded, his gaze dulled. He watched his son leave, a crushing emptiness growing in his heart. Signing that agreement had changed his life forever. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt that his life, like his home, was now entirely in someone else's hands. This sense of powerlessness weighed on him unbearably. Days in a new apartment dragged on slowly, blending into a monotonous gray blur. Though clean and modern, the apartment felt not just empty, but lifeless to Vladimir Nikolaevich. He felt utterly alien within its walls, like a transplanted tree unable to take root in foreign soil. He desperately missed his old home, his beloved garden where he spent so much time, his tiny but dear workshop, every corner holding cherished memories. Now, Oleg reigned supreme there. His son called rarely, his visits even rarer. Oleg was busy with his new life, his thriving business, and plans to completely renovate his father's house. His promises to care and visit dissolved in the bustle of his successful existence. He occasionally brought groceries, but their conversations were short, formal, and superficial. Every word from Oleg, even if spoken with feigned concern, rang with the echo of emptiness, underscoring his indifference. Vladimir Nikolaevich spent his days alone. He tried reading books, watching TV, but nothing brought him the joy or distraction it once did. He felt useless, unnecessary, like a discarded machine. He had no pension yet, and was entirely dependent on the meager funds Oleg occasionally provided. This situation humiliated him, but he could do nothing about it. The only one who occasionally called and showed any interest in his life was Marina. She asked how he was, but her interests still revolved around her plans for emigration and a future she envisioned far away. She didn't know the full depth of the conflict with Oleg, or the terrible price her father had paid for his freedom from debt. Vladimir Nikolaevich didn't want to upset her, so he always said everything was fine, trying to conceal the true state of affairs. One day, as Vladimir Nikolaevich sat by the window, looking out at unfamiliar courtyards, the phone rang. It was Oleg, his voice unusually animated, carrying notes of something new, almost triumphant. "Father," he said, without his usual indifference, "I want to show you something. Come to the house tomorrow. I'll be there. The apartment is yours now, but it's still your home. I found something." Vladimir Nikolaevich was surprised. Oleg had never invited him to the house, since it became his property. This initiative was completely unexpected. What could be so important that Oleg broke his habitual detachment? Could he finally be showing a shred of humanity, or was this another hidden motive? The invitation disrupted his usual state of hollow emptiness, sparking a tiny glimmer of curiosity and hope. Oleg's invitation to the house was unexpected. Vladimir Nikolaevich spent a sleepless night trying to decipher his motives. What could be so significant that Oleg, who always kept his distance, suddenly called him? Hope mixed with apprehension. Perhaps he wanted to take something else, or was this a new trap? The next morning, Vladimir Nikolaevich arrived at his former home. His heart sank when he saw the changes. The facade was freshly painted, the windows gleamed, and in the yard, where his small garden once stood, the outlines of a new structure were already visible. The house looked alien yet rejuvenated, as if it had breathed new life. But without him, Oleg met him at the doorstep, looking more relaxed than usual, with an unfamiliar spark in his eyes, resembling excitement. "Come in, Father," Oleg said, stepping aside. "I want to show you something. I was going through old things in your former workshop, planning to turn it into my office." Vladimir Nikolaevich entered the house. Inside, everything had changed too. The old furniture was gone, the walls painted in light tones. His workshop, where he had spent so much time, was now almost empty, prepared for renovation. He felt a pang of nostalgia. Oleg led him to a corner of the room where an old, dusty workbench stood. I moved it to clear the space, Oleg explained, and something was sticking out from the wall. I decided to check. He pointed to a small niche hidden behind the workbench. Inside lay a tightly sealed wooden box, old and worn with faded patterns. I opened it. Oleg continued, his voice tinged with surprise. There were documents, very old, and photographs. He handed Vladimir Nikolaevich a yellowed sheet of paper. It was an old contract from his youth, related to the purchase of land for some construction project. But more importantly, alongside it were documents indicating that his name, Vladimir Nikolaevich, appeared only as a nominal figure, while the real owners and organizers were others, the very people who ultimately ruined his first business venture. Father, Oleg's voice was no longer just surprise, but filled with disbelief and perhaps the beginnings of respect. It says, here you were just a front in that scam. It wasn't you who failed the business. It was those behind you. Vladimir Nikolaevich took the papers, his eyes scanning the lines as long-forgotten pieces began to fall into place. He remembered those times, his youthful naivety, his trust in those experienced partners who so convincingly promised golden opportunities. He had always blamed himself for that failure, for the debts. It was a major scam, Father. Oleg continued, his tone entirely changed. The former arrogance gave way to astonishment and newfound interest. The company that later went bankrupt where you worked, it was involved too. They used you and then just got rid of you. The box contained other documents, letters, promissory notes, receipts, photographs of those same partners he had once started with. Studying them, Oleg, with his business acumen, began to see the full picture. His father wasn't a failure but a victim, coldly used and discarded. Vladimir Nikolaevich sat stunned. For decades, he had lived with the stigma of failure, blamed himself, and was ashamed of his debts. Now, it turned out he wasn't to blame. This unexpected discovery turned his entire life, his self-perception, upside down. More importantly, it changed Oleg's view of him. In his son's eyes, Vladimir Nikolaevich saw not contempt, but something new, understanding and perhaps respect. This old house held not only memories, but also a truth that had waited years to be uncovered. After the astonishing discovery in the workshop, the atmosphere between Vladimir Nikolaevich and Oleg changed dramatically. The icy wall that had stood between them for years began to thaw. Oleg, accustomed to cold calculation and logic, was shaken to his core. In his world, there was no place for such injustice. His father, whom he had considered weak and naive, turned out to be a victim, not a culprit. They spent hours in the workshop with Oleg, leveraging his analytical mind and legal education, meticulously studying each document and letter. He asked his father questions, tried to reconstruct the timeline of events, and uncover every detail of that old scam. Vladimir Nikolaevich, initially hesitant, grew more confident, recounting his youthful enthusiasm, his trust in those who seemed so influential and successful, his hopes, and the subsequent disillusionment. He recalled faces, names, fragments of conversations that once seemed meaningless. Father, this was an entire scheme, Oleg said, his voice filled with indignation. They used you to cover their tracks, and when it became inconvenient, they just got rid of you. You were a pawn in their game. Vladimir Nikolaevich listened to his son, and strange feelings stirred within him. It was bitter to realize his life had been so cruelly and cynically exploited. Yet there was also immense, all-consuming relief. He was innocent. He wasn't a failure. He was a deceived victim. The burden of guilt he had carried for decades began to lift from his shoulders. And then, when you went to work for that company, Oleg continued, his eyes blazing, they kept using you to cover their tracks. Your bankruptcy wasn't just a coincidence. It was part of their plan. They knew you wouldn't dig deeper. You were too honest. This was a new shock. Not only his first business, but also his subsequent dismissal were part of a meticulously planned scheme. The realization that his life was so deeply entangled in a criminal plot was staggering. We can't let this go, Father, Oleg said, his voice firm, not directed at his father, but at those who had caused him pain. We have to restore justice, prove your innocence, and punish the guilty. For the first time in years, Vladimir Nikolaevich saw something more than calculation in Oleg's eyes. Not the cold resolve he was used to, but righteous anger, a desire to protect. It was an astonishing feeling. His son, who had always despised him, was now ready to fight for him. But it's dangerous, Oleg, Vladimir Nikolaevich warned. These are powerful people with connections. I know, Oleg replied, clenching his fists. But you won't be alone. I'm with you. We'll do this together. Marina, who of course knew nothing of what had happened, soon received a call from Oleg. Her brother, usually so reserved, could barely contain his emotions as he told her about the discovered documents. Marina was stunned. She couldn't believe that their father, whom she considered merely old-fashioned, had been caught up in such a story. I'm coming over now, she said, her voice carrying genuine concern and empathy for the first time. I need to see this. The truth, emerging from that old box, didn't just change their family history. It rewrote it, revealing who their father truly was and bringing them closer than they ever imagined possible. It was the beginning of their shared journey toward justice, a path full of dangers but also new hope. Marina's arrival at the house was swift. Usually detached and indifferent to family matters, she rushed over as soon as Oleg told her about the unexpected find over the phone. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with shock and disbelief. She had never seen her father in such a state or heard such words from Oleg. "Dad, is it true?" she asked, entering the living room where Oleg and Vladimir Nikolaevich sat, surrounded by old documents. "You weren't to blame?" Vladimir Nikolaevich nodded, his eyes filled with both sadness and relief. Oleg, taking the lead, began explaining the details to Marina, pointing out specific clauses, names, and dates in the documents. He spoke with a passion and conviction Marina had never seen in her older brother. Listening to him, Marina felt her previous perception of her father crumbling. Her image of him as a failure and an old-fashioned man turned to dust, replaced by a picture of a man who had been a victim of a cynical and cruel game. Her dreams of emigration and escaping her troubled family suddenly faded in the face of this shocking new truth. "This is awful," Marina exhaled, her voice filled with genuine outrage. "How could they do this to you, Dad? And you lived with this for so many years." Silence fell. Vladimir Nikolaevich merely shrugged. "I trusted them. I was young, naive, and then I just didn't want to dig up the past. I thought it was all behind me. But it's not," Oleg said, his gaze firm. "It's still here, and we have to deal with it. We have to restore justice." It was a true family council, the likes of which this family hadn't seen in years. For the first time, they sat together, united by a common goal, to help their father defend his honor, uncover the truth, and punish the guilty. The estrangement that had long corroded their relationships began to recede. Oleg proposed a plan of action. As a lawyer, he would handle the legal side, gathering additional evidence, consulting with colleagues, and finding ways to reopen the case. Marina, with her skills in online research, could help search for former employees of the company, witnesses, or any small leads. This would be dangerous. Oleg warned. These people are powerful. They won't want the truth to come out. "I'm not afraid," Marina said, her voice unexpectedly firm. "Dad suffered for so many years. We have to help him." Vladimir Nikolaevich looked at his children, tears welling in his eyes. He couldn't believe this was happening. His estranged children, who seemed never to understand him, were now ready to fight for him. It was the greatest gift. They spent the entire evening discussing details. Oleg drafted a list of initial steps. Marina began searching online, and Vladimir Nikolaevich, for the first time in a long while, felt a surge of strength. He wasn't alone. He had his children, and they had a shared goal that promised not only to restore justice, but perhaps to heal their deeply wounded family. The first steps toward justice proved more challenging than anticipated. Oleg, with his legal knowledge and extensive business connections, began by trying to gather more information about the bankrupt company and the people behind it. He encountered unexpected resistance. Documents disappeared, archives were sealed, and former employees either remained silent or claimed ignorance. Their voices on the phone sounded frightened. It became clear that someone very powerful didn't want the truth to surface. "This isn't just a coincidence, Father," Oleg told Vladimir Nikolaevich during another meeting. "They've covered their tracks well, but I feel we're on the right path. Someone is very afraid we'll dig up the truth." Marina, using her online research skills, also hit a wall. Articles about the company's bankruptcy were sparse, and mentions of her father's partners were almost non-existent. This confirmed Oleg's fears. Someone had meticulously hidden their involvement in the scam. "Everything's been cleaned up, Dad," Marina said, showing her father blank pages where links to old publications should have been. "It's like these people never existed. But I won't give up." Svetlana Anatolyevna, whom Oleg kept informed, began to worry. She saw her children diving into a dangerous game. "Oleg, be careful," she pleaded over the phone. "These people could be dangerous." But Oleg was resolute. "Mom, we can't leave it like this. Dad suffered for so many years. We have to fix this." That's when the covert threats began. At first, there were anonymous calls with silence or brief, menacing phrases. "Forget the past. Don't meddle where you don't belong." Then, someone tried to hack Oleg and Marina's social media accounts, and emails with viruses started arriving. One night, as Oleg returned home, a suspicious car tailed him. He had to take detours to shake it off. He told his father about it, and Vladimir Nikolaevich felt cold sweat on his brow. He had been right. These people weren't joking. "They know we're digging," Oleg said. "That means we're close." Despite the growing danger, father, son, and daughter grew even more united. The threats only strengthened their resolve. Vladimir Nikolaevich, who had lived in the shadow of his past failures for so long, now felt he was fighting for something greater than just his name, for justice, for his family, for his dignity. Oleg and Marina began acting more cautiously, setting up new security protocols, communicating through encrypted channels, and trying not to leave traces. They understood their first steps had led them into direct confrontation with powerful enemies who had stopped at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. This struggle was just beginning, and the stakes were incredibly high. The threats didn't deter Oleg. They only fueled his determination. He realized he was digging in the right direction. Using his connections, Oleg contacted a retired investigator who had once handled the bankruptcy case of that company. Initially reluctant, the investigator, under the weight of Oleg's compelling arguments and a document from the box, agreed to help. His knowledge and experience proved invaluable. It turned out the bankruptcy was carefully orchestrated, with many key figures simply vanishing from sight. The investigator revealed pressure from above, how the case was quickly closed to prevent it from reaching the truth. This confirmed Oleg and Vladimir Nikolaevich's worst fears. They were up against someone very powerful. "Father," Oleg said, showing new documents obtained from the investigator, "look, these are the same names from your papers. They didn't just shut down your business. They used your name for money laundering. And when things got risky, they framed you as the failed businessman." Vladimir Nikolaevich listened, anger rising in his soul. Hatred for these people, their cynicism, and the way they destroyed his life boiled within him. But now it wasn't powerless anger. It was a resolve to fight. Meanwhile, Marina found several old newspaper articles from that period, indirectly mentioning the same names in Oleg's documents. She also discovered that one of her father's former partners, Andrei, whom Vladimir Nikolaevich considered a friend, was a key figure in the scheme. Using Vladimir Nikolaevich's trust, Andrei signed documents in his name while he suspected nothing. "Dad, did you know this Andrei?" Marina asked, showing an old, yellowed photograph. "He's everywhere in this." Vladimir Nikolaevich looked at the photo. Yes, it was Andrei, his friend, the one he trusted. The realization that he was betrayed not by a stranger, but by someone he considered close was like a knife in the back. Old connections turned out to be not just ties, but a web of betrayal. The investigation moved slowly but steadily. Each new document, name, and fact brought them closer to the truth, but the threats grew more overt. Anonymous calls turned into direct warnings. One night, someone smashed a window in Oleg's apartment. Not mere vandalism, but a clear signal. They knew where they lived and what they were willing to do to stop them. "They want to scare us," Oleg said, cleaning up the broken glass. but we won't give up. This only proves we're on the right track. Despite the fear, Vladimir Nikolaevich felt an unexpected resolve. He was no longer the naive old man easily deceived. He was a father fighting for his honor and his children's future. The investigation was turning into a real war. The threats intensified, their phones were tapped, and they were followed. Oleg, using his connections, confirmed that a highly influential figure involved in crime was behind it all, with ties to law enforcement, making their fight even more dangerous. Father Marina, Oleg said during one of their secret meetings, now held in different locations to avoid surveillance. We have to be very careful. These people won't stop at anything to keep their names hidden. Despite the fear, Vladimir Nikolaevich didn't back down. He felt he had finally found purpose in life, not just fighting for his innocence, but for his honor, justice, and his children by his side. In those days of danger and tension, a profound closeness developed between father and son. Oleg, seeing his father's resilience and courage, began to truly respect him. He saw that Vladimir Nikolaevich wasn't just naive, but a man of principle who, despite life's hardships, retained his integrity. He realized his contempt for his father had been unwarranted. "Father, forgive me," Oleg said one day as they sat in a car, watching the house of one of the partners. "I was unfair to you. I didn't understand what you went through." Vladimir Nikolaevich placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It doesn't matter, son. The important thing is we're together." This dangerous struggle brought them closer. They became a true team. Oleg shared all his thoughts and plans with his father, while Vladimir Nikolaevich offered advice based on his life experience, which his son had never listened to before. Marina, too, felt part of this team, assisting with research, tracking people, and creating secure communication channels. She stopped thinking about immigration. Her world narrowed to this shared goal of justice for her father. They discovered that the main orchestrator of the scam, a prominent businessman, lived a lavish life using money stolen from many like Vladimir Nikolaevich. He was involved in other schemes, and their investigation began to touch his sensitive spots. One day, while trying to access restricted databases, their car was blocked on a remote road. Several burly men emerged from another vehicle, approaching them. This wasn't just a signal. It was a direct threat. Oleg, with his quick reflexes, managed to maneuver the car and break through the blockade, barely escaping. Adrenaline surged, but fear gave way to even greater resolve. "They won't stop us," Oleg said, his voice firm. "We'll see this through." This dangerous closeness not only united the family, but put their lives at risk. They understood they had stepped onto a warpath with no retreat. Each step brought them closer to the truth, but also to mortal danger. The attempt to intimidate them only strengthened the family's resolve. Oleg and Marina began operating even more covertly, changing phone numbers and using encrypted messengers, while Vladimir Nikolaevich rarely left the house to avoid danger. Using his journalistic connections, Oleg arranged for the publication of incriminating evidence. He knew the only way to protect themselves from such powerful enemies was to bring the case into the open. He prepared materials proving the influential businessman's involvement in the financial scam and his connection to the company's bankruptcy, where Vladimir Nikolaevich worked. "We have to be ready for anything, father," Oleg told Vladimir Nikolaevich. "Once this is published, they'll act, and they'll act harshly." Their suspicions were confirmed. The night before the planned publication, someone tried to break into Oleg's apartment. Only thanks to the alarm system he had installed and quick action did they avoid disaster. This wasn't just intimidation. It was an attempted assault. Vladimir Nikolaevich worried for his children. He saw how Oleg, always so calculated and cautious, was now willing to risk everything for him. He saw how Marina, who dreamed of a quiet life, had become a brave ally. He was proud but also afraid. Meanwhile, Marina, digging into old cases, uncovered another critical detail. One of Andrei's old friends, the one who betrayed Vladimir Nikolaevich, had recently died under mysterious circumstances. In his apartment, which his relatives were selling, she found several old diaries. Between the lines were cryptic references to secret meetings, large money transfers, and names tied to their investigation. Most importantly, there were notes about the main orchestrator's secret hideout, where he kept key documents. Oleg, this is our chance, Marina said, her voice trembling with excitement. If we find this place, we'll have irrefutable proof. Oleg, studying the diaries, realized they pointed to an old, abandoned dacha outside the city, once owned by a front in their scheme. He prepared to go there immediately. No, Oleg, Vladimir Nikolaevich said. I'm coming with you. This is my home, my life, and I want to be there when it ends. Oleg hesitated, but then nodded. He knew his father was right. It was his fight, and he needed to be there. The three of them, Vladimir Nikolaevich, Oleg, and Marina, set off for the old dacha as night approached. It was a risky, desperate attempt. They fell on the edge of a precipice, but there was no turning back. Their lives now depended on this final, decisive step. They were ready for what might be their last battle. The three arrived at the old, abandoned dacha under the cover of approaching night. The moon barely lit the path, casting eerie shadows. The house looked grim, with broken windows and a sagging roof. It seemed a repository, not only of decaying walls, but of dark secrets. Oleg, exercising caution, entered first, followed by Vladimir Nikolaevich and Marina. Inside, it was cold with a smell of mold. They turned on their phone flashlights, illuminating dusty rooms. According to the diaries, a secret storage was somewhere here, Marina whispered, referring to the notes. It mentioned a basement or a hidden compartment under the stairs. They began their search. Vladimir Nikolaevich, whose memory of old buildings was sharp, recalled that such houses often had hidden niches for storing supplies. He started inspecting the walls, listening for any sound. Finally, in one room behind a rotted floorboard, he found a hidden compartment. It was masterfully concealed, impossible to find without the diary's clues. Oleg, straining, pried the board loose. Beneath it was a small metal door, locked with an old, rusty padlock. Oleg fetched tools from the car, and within minutes, the lock gave way. Behind the door was a small, dry room containing a sturdy, old metal safe. Here it is. Marina exhaled. This must hold all the evidence. As Oleg worked to open the safe, Vladimir Nikolaevich suddenly felt an odd sensation. He glanced back and saw a shadow flicker at the house's entrance. Oleg, Marina, he whispered. We're not alone. At that moment, a loud crash sounded, and the door swung open. Several large figures appeared in the doorway, holding flashlights and, judging by their outlines, something resembling weapons. These were men sent by the businessman involved in the scam. They had found them. Well, treasure hunters, a rough voice sneered. Found what you were looking for? Oleg quickly assessed the situation. They were trapped with no way out. He lunged at the safe, trying to force it open. At the same time, one of the attackers charged at Vladimir Nikolaevich. But the old builder, despite his age, wasn't so easily overcome. He dodged the blow, using his experience, grabbed a sturdy wooden beam lying nearby, and sharply pushed the attacker back. A fight broke out. Oleg finally opened the safe. Inside were folders of documents, flash drives, and a thick stack of old, yellowed photographs. These were the originals of all the documents proving not only the scam, but also the businessman's ties to other, even larger crimes. And, most surprisingly, among the papers was an old, dusty family photo album once belonging to Vladimir Nikolaevich's uncle. Oleg, this is it. Vladimir Nikolaevich shouted, fending off attackers. This is all the proof. Marina quickly grabbed the flash drives and some documents, tucking them under her jacket. Oleg, still fighting, searched the safe for more. He found an old notebook, its final page inscribed with, "All debts settled. Your uncle." It was a note that changed everything. It turned out that Vladimir Nikolaevich's long-standing debts, which had led to the situation, had actually been settled by his late uncle years ago, but no one knew. This meant Vladimir Nikolaevich hadn't owed anything. He had been deceived twice. At that moment, one of the attackers drew a pistol. The situation turned critical. They were on the brink of disaster. The new discoveries gave them hope, but also put their lives in direct danger. The situation escalated. The threat became real, tangible. Oleg, clutching the found documents and flash drives, desperately fought off the attackers. Marina, despite her fear, helped by throwing anything at hand at their assailants. Vladimir Nikolaevich, with surprising energy for his age, used his skills as a former builder to defend himself and protect his children. He knew these documents were their only chance for salvation. One of the attackers, the one with the pistol, aimed at Oleg. At that moment, Vladimir Nikolaevich, acting on instinct, pushed his son aside and took the blow. The gunshot deafened them. Vladimir Nikolaevich fell, clutching his shoulder. "Father!" Oleg shouted, rushing to him. The distraction allowed Marina to run outside and, using her phone, call the police number Oleg had given her for emergencies. She shouted into the phone, giving the address and describing the situation. The distant sound of sirens was their salvation. The attackers, hearing them, panicked. Realizing their plan had failed, they dropped the pistol and fled. Within minutes, the police arrived. Oleg, Marina, and the injured Vladimir Nikolaevich were rushed to the hospital. Vladimir Nikolievich's wound was not life-threatening, just a graze to the shoulder, but it was a serious warning. In the hospital, Oleg handed over all the found documents and flash drives to the police. The evidence was irrefutable, containing not only details of the financial scam, but also records of other crimes, money laundering schemes, and corrupt officials who aided the influential businessman. But the greatest revelation was the uncle's note, which completely changed the narrative of Vladimir Nikolievich's debts. It turned out that his uncle, a wealthy man, had secretly paid off all of Vladimir Nikolievich's debts years ago to give him a fresh start. But why didn't Vladimir Nikolaevich know? It soon became clear that Andrei, the friend who betrayed him, was not only an accomplice in the scam, but had intercepted a letter about the debt repayment. He manipulated Vladimir Nikolaevich, making him believe in his own guilt and debts to keep him under control and use him for their purposes. It was the cruelest betrayal. News of the exposure of a major financial scam and the involvement of influential figures in crime spread quickly. Journalists, to whom Oleg had passed the information, published explosive articles. The scandal was massive. All those behind the scam, including the businessman, were arrested. Vladimir Nikolaevich became not just a victim, but a hero. His innocence was fully proven. His name cleared of decades of stigma. He received compensation for moral and material damages, allowing him to live comfortably again. The greatest outcome of this struggle was the complete reconciliation of the family. Oleg and Marina, having gone through fire and water with their father, saw him not as a failure but as a strong, honest, courageous man. Their respect for him was now boundless. Marina abandoned her emigration plans, choosing to stay with her family. Oleg, feeling guilty for his past attitude, did everything to ensure his father a comfortable old age. Years passed since those turbulent events. Vladimir Nikolaevich, fully recovered from his injury, now lived a very different life. The compensation allowed him not only to settle all symbolic debts, which, it turned out, never existed, but also buy a small, cozy house with garden, much like the one he had lost. It wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of his new beginning. He no longer felt useless. On the contrary, he became someone people turned to for advice, a man whose story became an example of resilience and the fight for truth. He often met with a former investigator, helping him write a book about corruption, using his knowledge and experience. His relationships with Oleg and Marina became strong and genuinely warm. The icy wall between them had crumbled irrevocably. Oleg, recognizing his mistakes, regularly visited his father, helped around the house, and shared his business successes. He became not just a son, but a friend and ally, immensely proud of his father. His worldview changed. He now valued not only material success, but also honesty, integrity, and principles. He even began actively engaging in charity, helping other victims of financial scams. Marina, who once dreamed of distant lands, found her purpose in helping others. She earned a law degree and worked for a nonprofit providing legal aid to fraud victims. She frequently visited her father, helped with chores, and, most importantly, was simply there. Her eyes no longer held attachment, only warmth and love. Oleg's children, Vladimir Nikolievich's grandchildren, often came to his new home. They ran through the garden, helped tend to plants, and listened to his stories about construction and his past. In their eyes, Vladimir Nikolaevich saw the joy and love he hadn't fully felt in so long. Sometimes in the evenings, as they sat together in the garden, Vladimir Nikolaevich recalled those dark days when he stood on the edge of the abyss. He remembered his fears, his naivety, his friend's betrayal, and his son's cold calculation. But now, those memories brought no pain. They were part of his healing, a reminder of the long, difficult path he had walked. He realized that the debts of the past weren't just financial obligations, but emotional wounds and hidden secrets. Only by facing all the trials, uncovering the truth, and forgiving not only others, but himself could he find a true new beginning. His story became not just one of debts, but the triumph of the human spirit, the strength of family, and how even the bitterest lessons can lead to healing and rebirth. And he, Vladimir Nikolaevich, finally found his peace and happiness. Thank you for listening. Please share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in new videos.